And I walk into this downstairs and I hear Sigur Rós, and I just like burst into tears. I'm like, holy shit, this is more than I can handle right now. And it was like a so beautiful kind of a thing. Like the beauty was so intense and the vulnerability in the heart space was so intense that I just like started crying. Hello, friend, and welcome to the Sex Upgraded podcast, a podcast for men all about sex, where we'll combine real, authentic, and down-to-earth conversations about sex, life, and relationships with some pretty wild personal stories and practical how-to episodes as well, with guest experts from around the world to help you have the most amazing sex life you can possibly have. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host on this journey, and it's my goal with each episode to give you practical, actionable things you can start doing today to improve your sex life and your entire life, because a thriving sex life will help you thrive in all areas of your life. So let's begin today's episode by starting with a deep breath in through the nose into the belly together. Exhaling with an audible sigh. And let's get into today's episode. Sex party round 2. At this point in my life, I am more interested in sexual exploration. I have read Montauk Chia's book, The Multi-Orgasmic Man, but I had not figured out how to do that repeatedly. I had at that point had my first tantric orgasm that you can hear about in the other podcast episode, but I had not really mastered these skills so much. But sex was very interesting to me. Energetic exploration was interesting to me. Polyamory was interesting to me. Just connection and authentically being in bodies was interesting to me. So I got invited to this sex party that again wasn't called a sex party, but people had sex there and it was a sex party. It was called a sensual gathering. Maybe Sensual Spring, or that was somebody else's event. I don't know. There's a number of them in my past that kind of run together, but it was something like a sensual gathering.
How did you get invited to these things? If you could give a tip to anyone to say like, here's how you can get it. Can you give even such a tip? I don't know. Anyways, how did you get invited?
Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
I got a Facebook invite. I mean, we live in Asheville. I live in Asheville. There's a lot of exploration happening here. There's a lot of polyamory. There's a lot of people who are interested in kind of pushing the edges of what's normal and exploring outside the boxes. And if you start to live in a way that maybe is a little bit different from normal, and you go to certain kinds of parties, you do kinds of, just lifestyle things, people might notice you and think, oh, maybe that's the kind of person that would want to come to this sort of thing. I realize I'm being vague there, and it's because I can't come up with any sort of actionable things unless you were to just start telling people that you're interested in being invited to a sex party. Like that's one very bold strategy you might take that could backfire on you though, because we live in a world where there's a lot of repression and shame just waiting to fucking jump out of the bushes and tackle you. And judgment.
I think I'm going to try it anyways. Why not?
Well, you've already been to a sex party at least.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's true.
So I got invited to this. It was a small group of people who received the invite.
What's the small group? How big are we talking?
There were maybe 20 people that got the invite. And I think there were 12 or 14 of us who actually showed up to this event.
How many men, how many women, how many non-binary?
I'd say 50-50 men, women.
Okay.
There were some people there who currently identify as non-binary who didn't identify that way at that time. Mm-hmm. And that at that time, this was years ago too. This was like 6 or 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so even the conversation around being non-binary wasn't happening that much, mm-hmm. So these people might've had that internal reality and just not knowing what to call it. Mm-hmm. So I get there. An interesting and unique part of this experience that's different from the previous sex party is that there is going to be MDMA involved. Ecstasy. And this is a first time thing for me. I'd never taken MDMA in my life before. And I had always kind of put it in this category of being like a dirty drug. I had smoked weed, taken mushrooms. Those felt really organic to me. And I had this kind of like hierarchical purity idea around them because they came from nature, they're plants. MDMA I just put in this other kind of dirty club category. But the person putting on this gathering said, MDMA can actually be really, used as a powerful medicine to open our hearts and increase connection and all this stuff. And I, at that point, was on a journey of really wanting to open my heart, really wanting to experience more connection in my life, and suffering because of having a closed heart, you know?
It's funny that nowadays psychologists are using MDMA, right, in with clients. And it's funny that these sex parties may have been the precursors to this type of healing.
Possibly, probably. They'll never put that into a scientific study. But yeah, so the idea was to not take a recreational dose, but to take a more therapeutic dose. And again, I'm not totally versed in this realm. This is something that I don't have a ton of experience with, but my basic understanding is that a recreational dose is somewhere around 0.125, and a more therapeutic dose is somewhere around more like 0.08. Could be wrong, but I think I remember taking somewhere around 0.08 of MDMA. And the intention was to not feel like you were high on a drug, but just to receive some of the heart-opening benefits of that medicine, you could call it.
Okay.
And in this context, it was called a medicine. It wasn't called a drug. We were getting there to explore this medicine, explore sensual, sexual connection with each other while having this heart-opening experience.
How do you feel before this party as you're going up? I know it's years ago, but as you're going to the party, what are the emotions going through you?
I am excited and nervous. Yeah, excited and nervous. I'm like, ooh, what's going to happen? Who am I going to explore it with? How am I going to get aroused at this thing? Also, am I going to have to touch people? Are people going to want to touch me that I don't want them to touch me? How am I going to interface with that? At that point, expressing boundaries and expressing desires was not a strong point in my life.
Okay.
You know, that was not as clear as it is for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily it was guided pretty well. And we took the medicine, and then we went through a whole series of questions around desires and needs and boundaries and that sort of thing for the event. So we got some actually really good facilitation in the experience. And then we went through some connection exercises, just sharing how do you feel right now with other people? Like, what are your desires for this evening? What are your fears? Kind of in a rotational way. So we got to share and connect with different people who were there and sharing our own experience, kind of broke the ice. And then the intention was to keep doing more of that. But then apparently some people took more than the therapeutic dose. And if you've ever been around this medicine before, or if you've ever taken it, you'll know that at a certain point, doing structured things that involve intentional communication with somebody else, sitting in a structured way and moving around a room, doesn't really work so well. And it's much more attractive to just like rub somebody's arm or to like rub your face on their leg or like something like that. Physical sensations start to be really appealing and pleasurable. So people start to do this, and then the structured, facilitated part of things starts to fall away. I'm not feeling like I'm high on a drug at this point.
Okay. You're in regular mode.
I'm in regular mode, and I see these people start to be sensual around me and start to rub up all on each other. And I notice internally the thought and the yearning for it. I'm like, wow, that looks really nice. Wow, it's not sexual at this point. They're just being physically intimate with each other. And that was something that I wanted, like the freedom and the ability to be more intimate with people. And I remember just being up in my head about it, wondering, am I going to start to feel different? Am I going to start to enjoy this? Am I going to I want to do that, but can I go over to them? Like just all these thoughts and curiosities and things. And I just didn't take any action. I just kind of hung out there and like watched people do their thing, and ended up getting into some conversations with somebody. I think I put my leg over somebody else's leg as an attempt at more connection, which actually was helpful in the moment, helped me feel more connected with somebody else. And then it was decided that the upstairs, this was a 2-story house, the upstairs was going to be the sex zone. And that's where like genitals could be touched, and anything above full on making out was moved to the upstairs. And the downstairs where we were, that was a space for more like sensual body connection. It wasn't sexual. You could dance there, you could cuddle there, you could kiss, but after it got to a certain point, you wanted to move upstairs.
So downstairs was the kiddie pool and upstairs was Adult Swim.
Yeah, you could say so. Mm-hmm. You could say so, but there's a switch to that coming up that you might not expect.
Okay.
And so there was also a hot tub there at this house. And it was interesting though. It wasn't your typical hot tub. It was kind of like a giant farm bucket there's plastic, maybe like 5 foot diameter, that the guy's house he had wired, I think it was like the heating element of a dishwasher into the bottom of this thing and surrounded it by rocks. So it heated up the water to a certain temperature.
Makeshift hot tub.
Makeshift hot tub, cheap, very affordable hot tub. And his electrical wiring skills were top notch. So there wasn't a worry about that kind of a thing. But it was a hot water bucket basically. And I remember thinking, I'm not feeling this inside right now. I'm going to go out there. And my ex-girlfriend was at this gathering too, which is an interesting piece of information that I didn't share earlier, which was a little bit of the anxiety up front.
She was your ex-girlfriend at this party. She's not your ex-girlfriend. She's your ex-girlfriend now, but she was also your ex-girlfriend at this party.
She at the party was my ex-girlfriend at the party.
Do you have a girlfriend at the party too?
No.
Okay. You're single. Your ex-girlfriend shows up.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And we knew that we were both going to be there, and we were not yet at the point in our lives where we knew how to have intentional conversations about this kind of stuff. And so I decided I want to go out to the hot tub, and she wants to go out to the hot tub too. And I think there's somebody else in the hot tub. But this is where things start to get really interesting for me, because she says, Taylor, would you like me to float you in the hot tub? Floating meaning she offered to support my body. So I just get the experience of feeling weightless in the hot tub.
Nice offer.
Beautiful offer, actually. And so I said, yeah, that sounds lovely. Thank you so much for that offer. I'd love to try that. And I laid back, allowed her to support my weight in this nice hot tub. And it was super, super nurturing. I felt really grateful for it and allowed me to relax. It allowed my nervous system to literally let go because I was being physically supported. And it was in those moments that I felt like this internal switch happened around my emotions and my heart. It was as if up until that point, I had been existing up in my head, been thinking about things, worried about things, curious about things. And then there was a shift of my conscious awareness down through my neck into my actual heart, like the heart space of my body, the physical location of my chest. I somehow felt my consciousness drop more into that space. And it was as if I had a center of awareness there. Like there was actually perception that I felt in that space. And more importantly, it felt like that space was alive. And it was like the first time I had ever really felt that. Up until that point, I had done a number of trainings around nonviolent communication and intimacy, and attempted to build intimacy and attempted to open myself to love, and had done a number of really useful things and grown a lot in that way. But this was like somehow the MDMA acted like the key to a lock that unlocked this chain that was wrapped around my heart that couldn't let it breathe or couldn't let it open. And this is where I think the drug can be very therapeutic, because it wasn't like a drug experience, but I felt my heart open in a way that I had never felt before. And it was fucking phenomenal. It was beautiful.
Water, touch, and MDMA. It's a good recipe, right?
It was massively, massively beautiful. And I'm like very grateful for that moment. And it was not a sexual experience, to be clear, in the hot tub. It wasn't like she was trying to get me or turn me on or anything like that. And I wasn't like sexually aroused, but I was aroused in my heart in the sense of life was there. And I think all the work I had done up until that point had primed me for that moment. Like had I not done nonviolent communication, had I not really worked on intimacy, I wouldn't have been able to experience that opening, but I did. And it was beautiful. And I remember like started to experience some tears in the hot tub, but still like kept myself from crying in the hot tub. I realized, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to do that in my ex-girlfriend's arms. I'm not ready for that yet. But I did still feel this heart-centeredness happening. So we eventually decided to go back inside. And at this point, the wildness of the upstairs is in full swing. Like we're hearing people have sex and it's a thin floor, it's like bam, bam, bam. And you were hearing, like that happening from the upstairs. At the same time, Sigur Rós is playing on the stereo downstairs. And I don't know if you're familiar with that band, but that band has some deeply emotionally moving music, like some of the most beautiful emotionally stirring music that I've ever heard in my entire life. Right. And I walk into this downstairs and I hear Sigur Rós, and I just like burst into tears. I'm like, holy shit, this is more than I can handle right now. And it was like a so beautiful kind of a thing. Like the beauty was so intense and the vulnerability in the heart space was so intense that I just like started crying. And the only thing I could do was just lay down on the floor and cry. And it was powerful. I noticed there's like even some emotion that I feel right now thinking about it. It's sweet to feel that. And my ex-girlfriend laid down with me and just held me. And I like bawled. I bawled with this open heart, feeling all this just love course through my whole system. Meanwhile, Sigur Rós is blaring loudly on the stereo downstairs, and people are having loud sex upstairs. And it was this wild environment of like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening, but it feels so good, feels so amazing. I didn't know this was what it was actually like to feel love in this way. Like I didn't know this was actually what it was like to feel my heart. Wow. And I'm being supported. Somebody else came and like hugged me on the other side. And then I was in this sandwich of two people just like lovingly hugging me while I just cried and cried and cried while Sigur Rós was blaring and people were fucking upstairs.
Wow, it's quite a scene.
Yeah, it was a total scene. And
the
then
kiddie pool becomes the emotional pool of love.
Yeah, it was such a scene. And then I remember like the awareness of the scene that it was hit me in the moment as well. And I started crying because of that too. I was like, oh, this is so fucking beautiful. And everything's beautiful. And the floor feels amazing. You know, then like some of the effects of the MDMA were there a little bit. But again, I didn't feel like I was on a drug. Like everything just felt amazing and loving and open. And that awareness that had gone down into my chest, into my heart, it sustained and it stayed there. And it was so beautiful. And I remember after a long time of crying and being held, reached a pause, and we went up and we got some snacks. And then another different Sigur Rós song came on. It's just like, boom, a loving dagger into me that opened me up again. Then I cried some more. And I didn't feel like I was missing out on the sex piece at all. Like, I feel like this is the medicine I needed. Like, this is why I came to this thing. Sure, I could lick somebody else's vagina. Sure, I could like finger somebody or get a blowjob, but like, I've had that. I haven't had this before. This is fucking incredible, you know? So I'm going to go as deeply into this as I possibly can. Laid down again, cried some more. Magical, beautiful experience. And then I thought the night was over. And this is like hours, you know, at this point. And I'm thinking, surely people are done and it's about to wind down. And I feel complete with my crying experience. And I decide, you know what, I'm just going to go upstairs. Just to like see what's happening up here. And I walk upstairs. And there's all this like deep emotional vulnerability and openness that's in me, but not from a feeling of like scaredness at this point. It's like deeply embodied heart space and love and acceptance for all things. And I walk upstairs and I see this writhing pile of bodies on a set of mattresses in the back of the room. And people look over at me and they like beckon. They're like, come, come. And then I walk over and start kissing people and I start getting into it. And from this new space of open-heartedness, I actually start to really get into it and start fingering this person over here and kissing this person over here and making out with this person over here. And hands are going all over the place. And it was beautifully erotic and sexy. And then I went into this whole makeout vortex with somebody for a while. That was fun. It was beautiful. But it wasn't as nearly as impactful as the open-hearted experience of like crying on the floor and feeling like my heart had been unlocked. You know, that was the monumental takeaway from that experience. And I really, really understand why people say that MDMA can be used as a medicine, because in certain contexts, I can totally see how this can shift something fundamentally, not just a drug experience, but it can actually open something that sustains well beyond that experience. Like,
sounds so beautiful.
Yeah, it was really deeply beautiful. And the next day I remember I felt all that open-heartedness still. And I laid in my room and I journaled about it all for hours. Like where it had come from, where my blocks had come from, what it's like to feel love, what I want to feel in terms of love, how I want to express love. Then I cried and I listened to more Sigur Rós and then I journaled, then I cried some more. Then I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this is what it was actually like to live with an open heart, you know? And what I've since learned is that the impacts of MDMA can go until the next day. And of course I was still feeling a lingering aspect of that, but my heart didn't lock up and close after that experience. Like it wasn't like I was high and then I wasn't high anymore. It really was like something was unlocked in me. And from that point on, I could express love without concern of fear of intimacy. You know, and I could say I love you to people. I could hug people for longer. I could be more open. I could be more vulnerable. And I was like fundamentally different from that point. And it had nothing to do with having random sex with somebody at the sex party, but all to do about this big heart opening experience. Beautiful, massive.
Very beautiful story. It did not go in the direction I thought it was going to go.
Yeah.
Wow. What a unique entrance into the world of the mysterious world of sex parties.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which maybe are misnamed in this case.
Yeah. It's interesting. In this case, my first 2 sex parties ever, while there was sex that happened, the big takeaway was not actually the sex piece. And we'll fast forward a bunch of years until now. I have been to a number of sex parties. I've even put on a number of sex parties. We usually call them play parties, or we call them temple nights, sensual nights, that sort of a thing, sensual gatherings. And I did not have penetrative sex at a play party, at a sex party until a year and a half ago with my current girlfriend. We were out in Austin. We went to the Austin Tantra Festival. Then after that, we got invited to this other play party with other people. And it was a small group of people. And for whatever reason, I felt comfortable there and actually had penetrative sex with her in front of other people for the first time. And it was a super cool experience and novel. And it was also not this like deeply transformational experience either. It was just like, oh, that's cool. You know, we did that. Fun. It was nice to feel that level of intimacy. But when I think about the impact of the different sex parties that I've been to, they're like the big aha moments and the big growth periods happen from everything else that's associated with sex. You know, and I guess maybe I feel lucky to have been in a number of scenarios in different communities of people that really valued that and that incorporated that into the experience of the sex party itself, you know, with a presentation up front of saying, hey, you might have emotions. It's okay to cry. Hey, you might feel jealous. It's okay to feel that. Let's talk about what happens when you feel jealous. Let's actually figure out a way to work with that in the space so you don't spiral downward and enter into a pit of despair while you're watching your partner make out with somebody else. You know, let's work with all this stuff and have it be actually a transformational experience. And so, yes, the experience of being sexual with other people is beautiful and sexy. And also in these contexts, the ones that I'm more familiar with, it's been also emotionally transformational, spiritually transformational, and all this other stuff too.
A beautiful story, man. I'm very touched by it. I'm glad you had that experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's happening for you?
Just nice images in my mind of something really nice that your ex was the one to hold you.
Yeah.
You know, because my parents are divorced and they don't speak anymore. And that those types of stories give me a lot of hope for people who break up but can still love each other in different capacities.
Yeah.
And that like beautiful heart opening medicine is made illegal by crooked governments is like a thought on me. And I think that's a very intentional thing.
Yeah.
You know, keep people's hearts closed so they just work all the time and watch TV.
Yeah.
And I'm glad there's so many taboo things there, from men crying to going to sex parties to taking medicines to help heal yourself to holding your ex, that I'm like, hey, thanks for having to cross each of those boundaries, you know, in order to heal yourself and share that healing with other people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. There were lots of big things there for sure. Lots of edges to come up against. And like for me, just like I know you too, we've reached different breaking points in our life where I'll speak for myself, where I realized like, I don't want to keep living like this. Like, I don't want to keep living with a closed heart. That sucks. Like, I'd much rather feel deeper connection with people. I don't want to keep having sex this way. I'd much rather have sex this other way. So like, I'm going to take the scary action steps to lean into that and actually try to create a better life instead of just sitting at home and watching movies on Netflix or something. Like the potential benefit of stepping into the risky thing like far outweighs the risk of not doing so. Right.
A life of mediocrity or a path of growth, which is always accompanied by a lot of fear.
Yeah,
right.
For sure. Yeah. And a little like circular recap to come back around. Like now when I think about the concept of sex parties, they're not actually nearly as exciting for me as they used to be. Like we've been invited to a number of them in the past 6 months and we just haven't gone to any of them. They don't have that same allure. Like the magic of being sexual with just the two of us is super fun. But also now that I've experienced the intimacy that's powerful, the intimacy that's possible in threesome type scenarios, like that's so much more appealing to me than being at a sex party, because with 3 people, with 4 people, you have like the field of intimacy, if we'll call it like a field of intimacy, it's different than just the polarity of 2 people. It opens up and then it becomes this shape, then you can merge and roll around in this mass that is sexual arousal as a group. And that's super beautiful to me. And that's much more interesting than a sex party where there's a lot of different people having different sexual experiences all over the place. I imagine it could be different if it's like a 12-person orgy where everyone's being sexual together, but that's beyond my comfort and desire zone. Like I can't think of 12 people that I want to be sexual with. I have a hard time thinking of more than 3 right now, So that's a whole other tangent, but any other thoughts or questions to wrap up this episode?
Just like kudos for this kind of thing. And I hope the men listening to this are, I guess I just want to share with them, like, crying is healing. Yeah. Having someone hold you is very, very healing. Sex is like so beautiful and it's not the only game in town, and thanks for just, I'm impressed that, it seemed like you were desired at this party by numerous people and that you're still going, it's more important for me to cry these tears right now. I think there's a lot of beauty and inspiration for me in that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And then I will also on that note say, I have massively benefited from choosing that. Like the choice to cry and to go into that versus going for the shiny sex thing has helped me have much more amazing sexual experiences, including the threesomes I had always fantasized about, right. Because I was much more open and able to actually pursue the things I wanted with authenticity versus this skewed sort of like pornified idea of what sex actually is, utilitarian benefits to it as well.
Right.
Cool. Well, John, thank you so much for being here for this episode and just listening and responding and asking questions. And we actually recorded the first sex party episode here too in this same sitting. So I appreciate your questions and reflections and everything you bring to these conversations.
It's always a pleasure and I look forward to doing more.
And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or requests for the future, please shoot me a message via email or on my Instagram. And hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. The more the merrier. And I will see you next time.